The number one thing which I encounter when I work with senior leaders is how few of them are actually investing in better communication. And that is something which often makes me wonder. I get a little bothered, I get a little sad, I get a little upset. Of course, I take care not to communicate this to the coach because I am nobody to sit in judgment of them. But it just makes me wonder. And really,
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Angry Coach. Today, I have a very special guest with me. I have Coach Sreenivas Nagappa. Coach Nagappa is coaches very senior executives. He also consults on working capital and strategy. And dare I say, a fantastic mentor to me over at least the last 7 to 8 years. Coach Nagappa, welcome to this show of The Angry Coach.
thank you very much, Vivek, and appreciate your invite as well as your kind words.
Coach, as we get started, I have a question for you. What makes you angry?
So it's interesting, Vivek, when you told me that this was going to be the topic we were going to be spending some time on. I remembered that the 1980 film Albert Pinto Ko Gussa Kyo Aata Hai, which translated loosely me into Why Does Albert Pinto Get Angry? And this is an old 1980 Nasiruddin Shah film for those of you who might have seen it. A pretty nice Hindi movie. And I think it's fair to say over a period of time, over these years that I've worked, what we are going to probably touch upon are not so much things that get me really angry as in angry, but more in terms of make me think, make me wonder, make me sometimes a little sad that, some of these things are happening. So I hope that definition of the Albert Pinto's anger is okay with you.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right, excellent, excellent. So let me pick up your first question in terms of what actually makes me, let me use the word a little sad, a little angry. And I personally believe the number one thing which I encounter when I work with senior leaders is how few of them are actually investing in better communication. And that is something which often makes me wonder. I get a little bothered, I get a little sad, I get a little upset. Of course, I take care not to communicate this to the coach because I am nobody to sit in judgment of them. But it just makes me wonder. And really speaking, it takes four different dimensions, this not investing in communication, right? And I'll just spell them out very quickly and then we can pick up the conversation depending on what you feel is interesting. The first one is that their expectations of their team, of their peers, sometimes even of their superiors, is very unclear. So expectation setting suffers when they do not invest in good communication. The second big area which suffers is that feedback to the teams, even to peers, is often unclear, and so much is left unsaid that the other guy is almost constructing a completely different story. Right? So the first one was unclear expectations, the second one is unclear feedback. The third one comes directly and impacts their effectiveness and efficiencies, and that is imprecise questions and imprecise answers. Demanding precise questions is not something that comes. So the questions also that come to them are, couched, and you have to really invest 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes of your time to find out what are they really asking. And similarly, in the answers that go back, again, they go all around the world. And instead of going on the direct route from Bombay to Delhi, they go via Venice and also stop over in Australia. And this is very, very inefficient and very, very ineffective. Right? So really speaking, these are the three big dimensions of unclear expectations, unclear feedback, imprecise questions and answers. And sitting behind this is the fourth dimension, which is a little bit about this belief that I don't need to invest in communications, I am like this only. Everybody understands me. I've been like this for 25 years. And shouldn't I focus more on my domain and my job and the industry rather than focusing on communication? So I'd really look at this as part of these 4 dimensions.
That's a very interesting concept, and that's a very interesting thought, Coach Nagappa. And one part about it is when I'm early in my career, right? And I can understand a person not being able to communicate the expectations, not having the questions. But you deal with a lot of very senior executives in the industry, people who've been, so to speak, titans of the industry, right? Do you see the same patterns there as well? How do the patterns shift?
I think the pattern certainly shifts because necessity is the mother of invention. And therefore, yes, in the very senior, like you said, titans of industry, I've had the good fortune of working alongside some of them. Yes, there is certainly a very dramatic difference. What's unfortunately happened, it's almost like there is this very, very thin layer on top. Let's say the Usain Bolts of the world. And then everybody else is some 100 seconds behind them on a 10-second race. On a 10-second race, the others are 100 seconds behind them, right? And I think that is what really bothers me a lot. Because, sure, these titans of industry, that very thin, ultra creamy layer, if I use a loose phrase with no disrespect meant, sure, they will influence people and hopefully they will raise the standard. But I think along the line, as corporate leaders, we are not doing enough to identify and then address this issue such that they don't have to wait to become titans but start employing this along the line. Because you can imagine, unclear expectations will affect me even if I am a mid-level manager, right? Poor feedback or unclear feedback will affect me if I'm only a divisional chief, forget the global CEO of an organization, right? So somewhere along the line, I think corporates need to clearly say, sure, domain knowledge, capability on the job, industry knowledge, all those things are great, but equally, how I get that message across. And therefore, communication skills for people on the way up are crucial.
So, communication skills for people who are on their way up is an equally crucial aspect. Now, when you say communication, you really don't mean English, right?
Absolutely right. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, Vivek, because that was the 4th point that I was talking in the 4th dimension of not investing in communication, which is we are like this only, culturally we are like this. I was just coaching a CEO designate yesterday, and there were things about the way he was speaking which I said, can you do this differently? One, of course, was I've always been like this, and look, I'm successful. I'm going to become CEO of this 21,000 crore group. I mean, come on, I must have done something right. So, of course, there was that part. But the other part which struck me, and it keeps striking me, and it struck me again yesterday, is he said, well, Srinivas, if you're commenting on exactly how I put it across, I am like that only. That's again the very English phrase. And then he actually alluded, and this is again something which I see very often. He said, we are Maharashtrians, and this is the way we speak. And I was so tempted to say, hey, look around you. There are enough Maharashtrians who communicate remarkably well. And by the way, Maharashtrian was just an example I hear. I am from Kerala, so I speak like this only. I am from UP, so I speak like this only. But surely we can transcend that, right? So a very large part of it is getting over that. Nobody is expecting the Queen's English. Or rather, sorry, I should say the king. He's going to get coronated, I think, in May. So nobody is expecting the king's English. But you need to be able to communicate, and it doesn't matter that it has to be only in English. You can use other languages. You can use native languages. You can use what the listener is familiar with. It doesn't have to be only English, but you need to get that communication across. And if I may, Vivek, with your permission, take another half a minute to actually talk a little bit about, therefore, in these situations, how I respond is, I have a very simple mantra. I tell these leaders, step 1, you need to communicate. In however way it makes sense to the other guy. English, Hindi, vernacular, what. Second, you need to over communicate. Third, you need to communicate some more. And finally, you need to communicate and communicate. And so often we don't do this. And there are a lot of knock-on effects of this, because when I'm communicating so vigorously, automatically adjectives like passionate get attached to me. Automatically adjectives like commitment to the cause, to the company, to the program, etc. get attached to me. Right? And aren't they positives for a leader?
Correct. So what I'm hearing from you is, the more you communicate, the more the kind of words you want to get attached to you will get attached to you. But if you don't do that, how will anybody even know what to attach to you?
Exactly. And so many leaders who've been very successful say, yeah, but everybody knows I'm a man of few words or a woman of few words. But I always say, and therefore, have you not had enough situations where you had to fix things? So, yeah, but that's primarily, the problem gets externalized. They did not pick it up. So whenever somebody says, I am being misunderstood, I always have only one answer to say, they're not stupid that they misunderstood. You're not speaking Japanese that they misunderstood you, assuming the other person's not Japanese. They didn't misunderstand you, you miscommunicated to them.
So in a way, the onus is on me as a person who's delivering a message to make sure that the person understands what I'm saying, and not so much on the recipient to make sure that he has absorbed my message.
Exactly right. Exactly.
Very fair, very fair. And it's also very interesting to know that senior leaders suffer from something like this, not just people who are starting their career at a mid-level.
Yes. And that is because I think they prioritize things differently. And the belief is, if I am thinking like this, I'm sure Vivek shares the same belief. Right? If I come across a little, let's say, abruptly or in a somewhat irascible manner, Vivek has worked with me for 5 years, 9 years, I think you and I have been now associated with, right? So Vivek understands that, my heart is clear. That the way I'm thinking. But I keep asking these guys, although technology is advanced, I don't think your subordinates and your peers actually have one probe in your head and one probe in your heart to know the man has got a good heart, means nothing bad. This is exactly what he's thinking. It doesn't work like that. And, in manufacturing, as you would have come across, we have this phrase of first time right. Meaning get the product right first time, because then otherwise it leads to a lot of rework and cost and delays and so on. I wish in communication we could get this message across of get it right first time. And the reason I think a lot of senior leaders, like you alluded to, don't always do this is, one, they believe that we are on the same wave, which hardly ever happens. Right? The second thing is, and I hear this and I feel sad, or the closest to getting angry, is I don't have the time to communicate. I'm busy, I'm rushed off my feet. I called them in, I said, look, we need to do this, chop, 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 and they're gone. But half of them have not bought it. Half of them didn't understand my requirement. Half of them are wondering why. So I always say that, you just caused yourself more busyness and you lost business. I know they're spelled the same way, sort of. But you caused yourself more busyness and lost some business because you communicated poorly. You'll have to redo it because it's not first time right. You'll have to redo it. So if you're already busy today and don't have time for communication, I wonder how you'll find time to do it a second. But you have to, because the results matter.
Because the results matter. So in the process of busyness, you lose business. That is a fantastic phrase, Coach Nagappa, and thank you so much for sharing this. Coach, we are approaching pretty much the end of our time, but I'm curious about one thing. You've had a very long career, right? You started your career after IIM Ahmedabad, you started your career at Unilever, and from there you went on to head an organization, and from there you then went on to coach people who head organizations. Right. If you were to um, give advice to a person who is starting his career, to a person who's at a mid-level, level, senior manager looking at the next level, and to a person who is, let's say, vice president looking to be a CEO, across these three layers, what would your advice be to the junior most person, to a mid-management person, and to a senior manager person looking at an executive leadership role? How would you stagger your advice to these three cohorts?
Interesting question. So let me just reflect on that a little bit. And obviously, the question gets tougher as I move up the level. So I'll start with the easy one, which is also the first one, which is advice for somebody who is at the early part of his or her career. I would certainly say invest a very large proportion of your time in terms of understanding your function, understanding your job, understanding your industry, and then be able to tell somebody else what you do in an extremely short period of time. There is this phrase that if you can't explain to your 98-year-old grandmother exactly what you do in the office and limit that conversation to 2 minutes, you don't know what you're doing. Right? So I would tell the very young person, get damn good at your job, because if you don't know what you're talking about, it's going to end up being crappy, right? So get damn good at your job, but then also be very clear in 2 minutes to communicate to your 98-year-old grandmother what you would do. Now just think, if you're an investment banker, right? How would you communicate that to your 98-year-old grandmother? It takes some thinking, but it is doable. So that would be advice at the early stage of the career. At the mid stage of the career, I would say start looking at appreciating the fact that a very large part of your results will come not through self-effort but through collaboration. And therefore, start building those communication bridges. Historically, around the world, very unfortunately, but for example, sales and finance have always been at loggerheads.
Correct.
Right? Unfortunately. Right? And maybe when I was a sales manager, that was necessary. Maybe. I'm not so sure, but let's assume that, give myself the benefit of doubt, that maybe it was necessary because I had to push things and get them done. But when I get to the mid-senior level, I need to build those bridges of communication with other functions, because that is so very important for me to be successful. Forget about it, even if I looked at it from a selfish lens. And when I get to the senior levels, my life is not about my domain expertise, it's not about my industry expertise, it's not about how good I can sell or close the books or manufacture or so on. It's about influencing and impacting. And therefore, at the senior levels, all of or a very large proportion of my time has got to be spent in terms of influencing and impacting, both within my own company and often outside, whether it is chambers of commerce or industry, whether it is regulators, whether it is industry bodies. So those are the areas that I have to get into, and we need to start getting into spending time in terms of influencing and impacting. And the starting point of influencing and impacting is to appreciate the other person's story first before I start pitching my story. And that takes some doing. So I need to walk a day in the life of everybody else. In fact, I'm working with a couple of new CEOs. And I actually said that, if I'd met you earlier, I'd have done this, but let me still do it. Go out and spend 3 days with each of your deputies as their assistant. Sit next to them, let them take the calls they are doing. You're not the boss in that meeting, in that discussion. When they put the phone down, when they finish the meeting, say, hey, why did you do this? And have a chat, understand, right? Get a sense of how many thousands of things cross their desk every day. And how many of them are really important and how many of them are not. Just like, I think when we used to have young leaders join companies, we used to say, ride the trucks many years ago, right? Ride the trucks, go out, see what a salesman does, what every level does. So it is not just about the market, it's equally about your leaders. Only when you've seen how they live their life can you communicate better, can you influence better, can you impact better.
That is a fantastic set of advices. So invest in functional knowledge early on, know to communicate your functional knowledge effectively, at a mid-level know how to get leverage by working with multiple team members, and at a senior level be prepared to influence others in a way that they're excited about their work, know their world, and underlying all of these things is an ability to communicate your perspective in a good way.
Absolutely. That's very nice summary. I think the 98-year-old grandmother would be very happy with that.
Thank you very much, Coach Nagappa. Coming from you, it means a lot. I'm going to probe you a little further, and I think this is something that will definitely add value to people. A lot of people at a mid-senior level, so the pyramid gets steeper and steeper. The journey doesn't get any easier as you move up. Right. What are some common reasons why people at a mid-senior level would probably hit a glass ceiling? And what can they do if they really want to break that glass ceiling for themselves?
Interesting. And if I may just marginally, with your permission, Vivek, expand that question. Yeah, mid-senior to senior is when they hit this whatever glass ceiling. Absolutely. Yes, and I think the problem really is that somewhere in this mid-senior, senior journey, and there's no science to exactly when it happens, we have to hit a switch which converts a bit like, some of these taxis which run on CNG also have a switch for petrol, right? And in fact, I was coming back from the airport that day and that guy told me, my converter switch is not working. So this is a terrible trip. I'm going to lose money on it because I'm running on petrol. And it's an Uber trip, so the fare is fixed, whether I'm running on petrol or CNG, but my converter is not working, right? And I just thought about that and said exactly the same thing happens with our mid-level, getting to senior level sort of people. They don't hit that converter switch. And what is that switch? In the case of the Uber taxi, it was CNG to petrol or vice versa. In the case of the mid-senior people, it is hitting the switch from being very focused in my own domain, whether it is sales or finance or marketing or manufacturing or supply chain, very focused to be the best in that domain, to now hitting that switch and beginning to look left and right to say what are the implications of this tunnel vision on the rest of the company. Right? So I might say, let's say, if I take a sales example, I want another, 1,000 tons. And I believe another 1,000 tons is a damn good thing. The question that when I have this tunnel vision, it will be 1,000 tons at whatever cost. When I'm willing to look this way and that, I will begin to see 1,000 tons, but at what cost? Because I'm beginning to see the impact of my actions on other parts of the business, whether it is supply chain, whether it is profitability, whether it is market, with the whole works, right? And I think that is something that I would certainly urge people who are upwardly mobile to, of course, get damn good at their jobs, which is this vision, but also start looking around to understand what is the impact of actions that I take in my functions on the rest of the business. And this is, I think, the biggest and best training ground for general management.
So you're saying versus being very, so it's almost like the T model, right? Versus being very deep, you've also get more horizontal. Yes. And the implication of your actions on other parts of the business need to come to you and communicate those implications in powerful, assertive ways, and that help leaders be looked at differently as compared to just leading a business space. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Any other thoughts that come to you, Coach Nagappa?
I'm just going to leave you with one thought. A lot of people will say, yes, we know a lot about communication and communication skills. By the way, Warren Buffett is famously supposed to have said that, the one thing I would teach anyone joining business, and he said this 10 years ago, and I believe he repeated it at his, not this year, but the last year's annual meeting also, is communication. He would teach anybody communication. By the way, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, those associates, and with a couple of their other guys that they have around, you know how long their annual meeting lasts? It lasts typically. The shortest it has lasted in 7 years is 5.5 hours.
Whoa. Okay.
The shortest. Okay. And here are these 90-something-year-old guys. Warren Buffett is 93, 94. Charlie Munger is much younger. I think he's 92 and a half. Yeah, or maybe a year older, I don't know, something like that in that range. These two gentlemen who don't need to say a word because they have achieved so much and they've got to the pinnacle of their profession and their name is known around the world, invest 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 hours communicating what they are doing. They're not a publicly held company, so it's not that somebody will write a report on them and bring down their shares or stuff like that. They don't need to do it, but they do it, right? And therefore, I think this whole bit about communication is so very important. I think also because some of your audience is probably learning and development folk. A lot of learning and development folk believe communication is all about good English. And coming back to the point that you spoke of right in the beginning, English helps, sure, it does, but it's not the end game, it's not the be all and the end all, right? Communication is all about a mindset. If I believe that my role, whatever I'm doing, is to convince you and take you along, then I will invest in communication rather than being told to read 8 lines in a certain manner. And reflect on this back at home. Very often, I think we all are guilty of this, including the coaches amongst us. We come back home after a long day and say, good, let's go out for dinner, let's go to this Chinese place. Usually the family says yes. Get an outside agency to poll the family to say, well, I'm not so sure. What did I do in this case? I believe you are just like me. I like that Chinese place. I believe it's good to go there. So we are going. And if you ask me, Sreenivas, why did you make this daft decision? I will say, but nobody objected. In fact, there were many laughs throughout the evening. So I presume they loved it. So what does that do? That reinforces in me, I'm communicating right. So I'll do this again and again and again and again until the resentment starts building up. What we do at home, we do at work. So our subordinates don't say, Sreenivas, that's a lousy decision. But at the back of their mind, there's this little thing going, I wish I was concerned.
So you're saying, even if I have the right intention, it might not actually echo everybody else's thoughts. And if I want to be a good leader, it's important to pull everybody's thought, not just believe that my intent is right or rely on what worked well for us in the past will reapply to the situation as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to buttress that point, I have a very funny story. I used to work many years ago for a really brilliant but really violent boss. Brilliant and violent. And in any meeting which lasted anything more than 2 hours, each of us would be told at least 3 times that we would be sacked before the end of the day. Right? And he would also question which idiot recruited him, recruited me, etc., etc. And this would happen to us all. So we had a lateral hire once who came in at a reasonably senior level. His first meeting with this violent boss. And this guy said something, and this guy told him, the violent boss told him very clearly, I don't know which idiot recruited you. Whoever it was, you are going to be sacked by the end of today. Meeting ended. 10 minutes, and I'm still sitting, we were finishing some parts of it. A couple of us were still sitting with the boss, the rest had left because the meeting ended. And this guy gets a call from the HR department saying this lateral hire has just come across and put in his papers. So, what happened? So apparently he said that, look, rather than get sacked at 5 p.m., I'm going to resign at 12 p.m. So he took it seriously. And this boss was saying, but you all know, I say this all the time. You know I don't mean it. But clearly, somebody had not the same understanding.
Somebody did not have it.
And finally, that guy refused to withdraw his resignation. He said, I can't work here. And the rest of us, grudgingly, almost said, oh, I wish we had that much of guts.
Fantastic. Coach Nagappa, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Thank you so much for sharing these stories and in such a light, fun-filled manner. Appreciate this time.
Thank you very much, Vivek.
Coach Nagappa, before you leave, if any of the listeners want to reach out to you, if they want to engage you for a coaching conversation, how could they be in touch with you?
Well, I think the simplest one is get in touch with Vivek. He knows how to find me. He has tabs on me 24/7. Okay, but otherwise, apart from that, I am reachable at sn@snagappa.com. So sn@snagappa.com. Nagappa is spelled with a double P. But otherwise, like I said, the simplest way is Vivek will find me wherever I am, and I don't have the guts to say no to him. Thank you very much, Vivek. And thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Coach Nagappa.